Are we live? Are we going? Fishron's on. Hello, Fishron. Is Twidget working? Where's Twidget? There's Twidget. There's Twidget. Okay. Yes, I think everyone's going. How is everyone doing this February? Yes, it is time for the live stream, and hopefully we can keep this one up.
Yeah.
Although I'm looking down at OBS, and this one is recording this time, so if something does happen, I won't be losing it. So, all right. So far we have Darth Fenrir and Tangelo. How you guys doing?
Okay.
Good. How about you?
Oh, I'm all right. So before we started, we were talking about the whole, Russia, Ukraine, and Biden beating the war drums, and I was saying that because they're making this big deal about all these troops near the border with Ukraine, but they're still in Russia. And I'm kind of wondering if maybe Putin is just moving the troops around to do the equivalent of going, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you.
And I think that's what it is, because like I said, he's done it in the past. He's done it with Georgia, he's done it with other nations,
And after Crimea, I don't really see him trying a full-scale invasion.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is he has doesn't he have hundreds of thousands of troops there? I feel like it's weird for him to amass that many troops and build field hospitals and stuff if he's not gonna, and platoons, if he's not gonna actually launch a full-scale invasion. What's the, he can amass some troops, but I don't understand why he's amassing that many. That's my question.
Well, from what I understand, most of them were there the whole time, and they're just kind of making a big deal about them now.
Yeah. And meanwhile, China is sitting in the background saying, "Come on, U.S. and Russia, just collapse already so we can move in."
Hello, JC, Consumer 23. Hello, Pierre. Hello, Bradley McPhee.
I did see one funny comment about China where it's what would happen if China takes over the entire world? It's well, if we legitimately can't stop them, let them take over the world. Their new communist empire wouldn't last 2 years, wouldn't last a decade, let alone 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People are talking about what would have happened, all these alternate histories where the Nazis won the war. In reality, they would have collapsed in 5 to 10 years. They were on the verge of it as it was.
Yeah, TIK History did a whole video about, does entire videos of World War II and all that, and one video he did that debunked, which is a popular myth, is that Hitler invaded the Soviet Union because he was crazy, and
there was good reason. There was good reason to do that, yeah.
Well, the reason why he actually went to war with the Soviet Union was simply because the German military was running out of oil. They were running out of oil. They needed to get...
Yeah, it was oil, and also the USSR, I think they grasped that in a couple of years they'd be developed enough to potentially launch an attack against the Nazis. So they kind of grasped that if they needed to sort of retaliate, they had to do a preemptive strike or whatever. I think that was also part of the
reason
rationale.
why. Well, and that's another thing, too, that people fail to realize. Hitler didn't just do it on a whim. His own generals told him, listen, Fyodor, if we're going to invade the Soviet Union, we have to do it in 1941, because if we wait any longer, we will not be able to do it again.
The funny thing, though, is when people always like to cite Hitler's generals and say, oh, they were so smart and they told Hitler to go for Moscow and he ignored them and he went for Ukraine. It's no, in this specific case, actually, he was right about militarily, right? Going for Moscow, literally what Napoleon did, and then his army ended up dying in the winter. You have to get the resources of southern Ukraine and the Caucasus, because in order to survive in Russia,
they did. The thing is, too, that was the original plan for Operation Barbarossa. The original target was to go for Moscow. That's what the generals wanted to do, but the Germans,
and it was done.
Yeah, the Germans became bogged down and they couldn't go in there. So then they went with Case Blue, which is what led to Stalingrad. That was, we gotta ignore Moscow and actually go for the Caucasus region. So, because not only will we have oil in the Caucasus regions, it'll also introduce us to the Middle East where we can get more oil, and that's where Case Blue was.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't listening to much of that. I was fixing the chat window, but we had a... Hang on. There was a chat. I saw it where Oh yeah, Consumer 23. Russian troops did enter the Donbass region controlled by. Isn't that one of the ones that declared independence?
Yeah, but again, Russia spent like 8 years cultivating like secessionist movements there. It's like again, if the U.S. had funded like Sunni like secessionist movements in Iraq instead of invading it directly, like I don't know how good I would have felt about that. Like I think, like I don't know, it just strikes me as very
you don't. Well, look, the reality is you don't have to feel good about it, but the reality is, if we go in militarily, that's not going to help anyone.
It hasn't the U.S. government already said that it doesn't want to invade militarily, like it's staying out of it?
They always say that when they're beating the war drums. They'll only do it as a last resort.
Well, they said they'll only do it if they invade a NATO country, right? I'm like 99% sure that's what they've said.
Yeah. And then when they hear Mr. President, country X bombed one of our bases, the politician goes, "Oh, how did this happen?" But secretly he's thinking, "Hell yeah! Now I have a reason to actually declare war."
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Which, by the way,
because just think about this. All this happened right as Biden's approval ratio started tanking.
Yeah.
Funny how that works, isn't it? President's approval rating drops. Guess we gotta have another war.
Funny thing is, I mean, like I said, I mean, Putin did the same thing in Georgia when the Bush administration was doing terrible in the approval ratings.
But why would Putin do that around the time that the American president is having low approvals? I don't know.
Yeah.
Feels a bit
Well, like we were saying earlier, he's probably just taking advantage of it. He's probably just testing to see what he can get away with. Like Shane said, he's probably deliberately doing that to say, "Hey, Europe and the United States, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. Oh, am I gonna touch you? Oh, nope, I'm not touching you." Or it's like, Russia, stay out of Ukraine. I'm not in Ukraine. Puts his foot over. Oh, now I am. Now I'm not. Now I am. Now I'm not.
The problem though isn't Ukraine like explicitly like begging NATO to help? Like it's
no. They're saying not to. They're saying all this stuff Biden is saying about Russia invading is a lot of crap.
No. They're saying that to avert panic, but like they want NATO help. They've been saying explicitly, you need to sanction Russia. You need to do all this and that. Like I think they've been saying.
Well, they're not asking for military help. I mean, they said they would appreciate public condemnation and all that, but they don't want the United States to say, "Okay, let's go to war with Russia," because.
Oh no, they don't want that, right? But they are taking like military aid. They are taking like quote unquote lethal aid from NATO and like other countries. Like they're voluntarily taking it.
Well, I mean, yeah, but they're still saying it's like, listen, we don't want a war. It's like,
no, I agree.
It's like.
I mean, lots of countries take aid. I mean, that's just the thing that they do.
Well,
that's how they get them under their yoke,
Yeah.
Well.
Oh my God! One of the scariest books ever written was "Confessions of an Economic Hitman." He goes over how all of that works.
Yeah, kind of reminds me of there was this one, Israeli, activist, who's trying to advocate for peace and all that. And he says, contrary to what some people think, the Israelis want peace, with the Palestinians and the Arabs too and all that. And it's really largely the other nations that are making it hard and all that. And like this one Palestinian, radical said, if Israel wants to be a neutral country and stay out of foreign affairs, why are they taking all this money and weapons from the US? And he flat out said, because it's free money and weapons. Who wouldn't say no to that?
Yep, and then they get you dependent on it.
Yeah. I mean, if I recall correctly, there was actually an Israeli general that flat out told the United States, it's like, listen, guys, we don't need any more weapons. It's causing further conflicts.
Can't Israel just turn back the weapons? I don't get that. Like, it's like, please, you're feeding me too much. That seems weird. Like, if Israel didn't want it, couldn't they just refuse it?
Well, there's a lot of logistics to doing that because it's like you gotta, because when the U.S. sends the weapons, it's pretty much a one-way trip. They just dump it out, and it's like, okay, here it is. So that means you have to invest, in, okay, we gotta pull it in money to send them back. Not to mention the other country might say, nope, they're all yours. We're not taking them back. You got to take them. It's like it leaves them in a tough situation. They can't just say no because there's a pretty good chance the U.S. won't take them back. So.
Well, I mean, even like you can do that for the current shipment, but like for example, like couldn't Israel say, okay, from
Be right
next
back.
year on, we're not taking your? Oh, okay, I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know.
you
I'm
can
not a
keep
foreign
talking if
policy
you want.
expert.
Yeah.
Just ask.
Well, Fishron wants to talk about the Canada trucker protests, and we got
Right.
Captain Pipsqueak, who, no, it wasn't him, it was Tia Gopher. One of them wasn't feeling well today and isn't going to be joining us. But anyway, Pip says, I've been paying more attention to Canada than the mess in Europe. So many different conflicting reports about what's going on there. The best thing that I can recommend is Viva Fry's channel, because he just took his camera and went there just for like hours a day, almost every day, and just talked to people. And was like, what's going on here? What's this all about? So if you want to know what's going on and, what they want, not get it through the ridiculous filter of the news media, that's a good place to do it.
The fascinating thing is like I was talking about this earlier just before the stream, but all the usual suspects you'd expect, like all the Trudeau supporters and everyone were saying, no guys, it's just temporary. Once they remove the blockade, we're gonna remove it. And then now Trudeau's out saying in a press conference, no, we've removed the blockade, but there's still an emergency, so we're still gonna keep it in place. Like these things don't end. Right, like, and everyone will warn that.
It's another interesting. It's another interesting thing I learned from TIK history that they don't teach in schools. Contrary to popular belief, Germany never actually declared war on France, England, or the United States. They declared war on him.
Right, but he invaded Poland first.
Yeah, the whole point of doing that stuff was to ensure that when he launched his campaign to go after. To go to Eastern Europe and the Caucasus regions was so France and the UK wouldn't get involved and apparently there's in the diary written by one of Hitler's, I think it might have been Goering. Goering talked about how when Britain and France declared war on Germany, Hitler looked at Goering and said, "Now what?" Like they
I mean, it didn't really happen with the U.S. though until Japan attacked the U.S.
Right,
and then the U.S. the next day declared war on Japan. So Japan declared war on the U.S. because they had a mutual treaty with Germany. Germany was obligated by that treaty to declare war on the U.S.
Right.
Well, that and the fact that the United States was only neutral on paper. Action-wise, they were pro-ally. Like, I mean, if I recall correctly, they were cutting off trade with Germany. They were practically giving Britain weapons for free. They were condemning Germany. From Hitler's point of view, the U.S. was already at war with him.
I mean, you can give aid
I
to
think it was mostly Japan
being...
because when they were, blockading the area and they even sunk that Japanese sub, Otherwise, Japan would never have pulled the U.S. into it because they knew they couldn't stand up to it. They knew as soon as the U.S. got into the war that it was just a matter of time.
The problem though was that Japan was kind of, because the U.S. did this oil embargo of Japan, right?
Yeah,
and
that's
Japan
the reason.
right, and Japan was just it needed that oil to expand, and it was just dying out without it. So its thought was, okay, if we can quickly destroy the U.S. fleet, and we can strike them quickly, and we can take the Allied colonies, because at that point they couldn't take the Allied colonies without declaring war. We can get access to those resources, and we can have a chance. Because either way, they didn't have any great options, right? It was either they strike at the U.S. and then a 10% chance they succeeded at destroying the U.S. fleet and everything, and taking all the colonies, or they had a 0% chance with the oil embargo. So they chose the 10% chance. I don't know.
So JC123 says, is the Canadian trucker protest forestalling people reaching owned property? No, they're not stopping anyone from reaching their own property.
They have frozen bank accounts, right?
Well, the government froze the truckers back up, but the truckers haven't stopped anyone from reaching their own property.
Right.
Yeah, Pip's
And
quick.
even
Pip says the smart Japanese officers knew they couldn't win. The Warhawks were deluded enough to think they could. Well, yeah, it was the war minute. I think if it were up to Hirohito probably would have stayed out of it anyway and just tried to find a different way of dealing with it.
Well, Hirohito was the emperor, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Hirohito was only ceremonial, right? Like there was someone else. I forgot who was. I forgot.
Tojo. Tojo.
Yeah, I feel like. Sorry, go ahead.
I was about to say, people love to hate on Hirohito because of all the atrocities committed by the Japanese.
He didn't do anything. He actually didn't do anything.
He literally could not do anything. And if he tried to, you know what would have happened? The Japanese military would have ousted him and replaced him. And people would say, no, they wouldn't. He was the emperor. They did it to his brother.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hirohito was not the first in line to the throne after his father. That was his older brother, but his older brother didn't agree with Japan's war policy, so they got rid of him.
Right.
Because Hirohito was more...
Hirohito was the one who decided, I'm pretty sure, right? Like at the end of the war, when the nukes got dropped, when like all the same Warhawks that dragged them to war were saying, we got to continue this fight and whatever. He was the one that said, we got to end it, right? Like that was the one time.
He was the one that addressed, the Japanese people, saying, "People, don't let the Warhawks convince you." And
they tried to coup him. I'm proud, that you've been loyal subjects to me, but I'm not worth dying over. I'm just an ordinary man like you. I'm not worth throwing away your life for. Right.
Well, and Pip Yamamoto understood that they couldn't fight a war with America the way they were fighting with everyone else, because they were only targeting the American properties and like the Philippines and Guam and the Marianas Islands and places like that. But they knew that, aside from things like the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the attempting to use balloons to bomb California, they knew they could not actually put the boots on the ground in the United States, or they would not have stood a chance.
Yeah, I like TIK history. He does a lot of good videos about World War II, and basically his videos only confirm 99.9% of everything you were taught about World War II in high school. It's wrong. It's bunk.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
What if a person can't get their vehicle out of the protest? People are getting in and out.
We were discussing this before the stream, but if the people were actually blockading the roads, vital infrastructure, and obstructing people's right to way, then the proper response for that would be to have people defend themselves and say, look, you either let me go or I am going to go myself and force myself through. But
if anything like that were happening, it would be all over the news.
Right.
Just like that Nazi flag crap. Oh yeah, there's a guy there with a Nazi flag, and there just happens to be this $50,000 camera pointed on him as he gets out and following the whole way as the protesters boo him and drive him off. And then less than 20 minutes later, it's all over the news. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. Not to mention, there's a lot of people that are suspecting that person who had the Nazi flag, he was actually planted in there by anti-protesters.
Well, I mean, someone planted him in. He wasn't a protester, and like I said, it was a little too quick there, getting this professional news camera on him and getting the footage out. Someone set that up, and it was someone who could get things to the news quickly.
This is one of the things I think about, because basically all of my life I can remember, because I was born after 2000, the left has been very authoritarian. They've been the side imposing their, has there ever been a time where the left hasn't been doing this?
It's a pendulum. So when I was growing up, there were socialists on the left, but they hadn't really taken hold. And I mean, you had the right, especially during the Reagan era, where you had things like, the moral majority and, trying to ban porn and trying to get creationism taught in schools. And so, the left was trying to feel, no, people have the right to think, and also, protesting Vietnam and things like that. And
Yeah,
so
'cause-
on the
oh, yeah.
right, you had all this authoritarianism going on. But whenever they were opposing anything the left wanted to do, oh no, liberty, the Constitution, and stuff like that. Well, the left lost the war on porn. They lost the war on abortion. They lost the.
You mean the religious?
The
the
lost
religious right. They lost, getting creationism times. They lost. And the only thing they really had left was their opposition to what the left was doing. And of course their response to that is, liberty and the Constitution and everything. And then the left, with nothing more to oppose, kind of stopped their rhetoric on liberty and the Constitution and went full-blown authoritarian. And, you've seen what happens. The Marxists have pretty much taken over. So,
I mean, who was on the left back at the time? I can't even imagine the left doing like the whole we're pro-Constitution thing. Who was on the left back then, if not for the socialists?
Well, I mean, you had the free speech people, you had the anti-book burning people, things like that. That was pretty much how the left was seen. You had the anti-war protests, Vietnam, and then, in Reagan you had, what did you have? You had Grenada, and all those others.
So basically, they were libertarians.
Well, not for the stuff they wanted to do,
Oh yeah,
right.
yeah.
But
they were still, put the screws on big businesses, tax the life out of people, and things like that. But
yeah, they just didn't want their issues. Like, I saw one person point this out pretty well, that had the roles been reversed in Vietnam, had South Vietnam been communist and North Vietnam been quote unquote, right wing, we wouldn't have seen protests. We would have seen people saying, no, you got to enlist. We got to protect the freedom of the people and workers of South Vietnam.
I feel like back then, though, wasn't it like taboo, like incredibly taboo to like sort of defend, like I'm pretty sure like you could get fired from your job and stuff, right?
Yeah,
like,
there was HUAC.
To be supported, right? Like I don't think that would have been a mass movement.
Though contrary to what your school tells you, HUAC and McCarthy had nothing to do with each other.
Wasn't McCarthy?
Well, they were kind of part of the same overall push, but they weren't directly related. And both of those are distinct from the Hollywood blacklist, which was also going on at the same time.
What was their idea for setting up a House Un-American committee and then like banning like it doesn't even make sense. Like why did they ever think that was going to work?
Cold War paranoia, pretty much.
Yeah.
So JC wants to know about the Confederate battle flag at the protest. I recognize that guy to be a Fed right away. Right, because why would any Canadian have a Confederate battle flag?
Yeah. Yeah, the only involvement Canada had in the American Civil War was when Britain deployed a small garrison because the United States seized a British ship, which pissed them off. But we said, okay, we're sorry. We'll keep you guys out of this war, regardless if you're harboring Confederates. We'll keep you out of the war.
But like there's a flag in Canada that I'm told is the First Nation tribes, not any of their individual flags, but they made this one flag that represents unity between all of those with these different figures and then this emblem in the center. And because there are a lot of First Nation people at the protest, and they were waving this flag, and the news media was trying to say that was a flag of hate.
Yeah.
E.G. Brandon, always funny how the right to think extends only as far as their own position. Yeah, they love liberty when it furthers their own agenda.
It's fascinating.
It's only when it gets in the way of that they have a problem with it.
You know what's a fascinating thing with the right? Like I see all the time, like people on the right being like, "Oh, we need to be pro free market, pro remove regulations," and then the most important part about that, one of the most important tenets of the free market, which is the free movement of labor, they don't support. It's just ludicrous. Like, how do you reconcile that in your mind?
Oh yeah, and it's like, oh, so I can fulfill my dream of being a porn director? No, porn's evil and immoral.
Women have the right to abortion. It's their body, their choice. Okay, then is it my right to take the drug of my choice? No.
Or another thing, or going back to abortion, Shane, here's another good one. It's like, okay, so a woman has the right to abort a baby. Let's say we accidentally got her pregnant and she wants to keep the baby, but I didn't want a kid. Can I run away? Can I run away and say, sorry, I'm breaking it off and not have my money forcibly taken? Oh no, you've got to take
You
responsibility.
gotta take responsibility. Yeah, funny how that works.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
Master of
it's like
Muppets.
I know you can't. I know it's a touchy subject, but do you know how much spousal abuse and spousal murders would be avoided if the courts would stop saying, "Okay, you're divorcing, she gets most of your money and stuff."
Yeah.
Like, do you know how many murders of passion would be avoided if the courts would stop being so biased towards women in divorce cases?
And Master of Muppets is saying that now even the Gadsden flag is hateful, and I think it's hilarious when people say it's a flag of white supremacy, considering that Christopher Gadsden was an abolitionist who believed in the equality of blacks.
Yeah, that reminds me of Muhammad Ali, where it's like his original name was Cassius, and he was named after a staunch, anti-slavery guy who, from what I heard, was kind of a badass when he did it.
Oh, yeah.
And what did Muhammad do to protest white supremacy? I converted to Islam, and I have changed my name to a guy whose religion still condones slavery, and he himself is suspected to have had slaves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, slavery was the norm back then,
Yeah, but still, it's like...
People seem to have gotten this idea that there was no slavery until Europeans discovered Africa, and then white people enslaved black people, and then they put a stop to it. No. Slavery was the norm since the very first governments were formed.
Out of curiosity, is there ever a point where like violence, like for example, like what John Brown did to like try and start, like, was that justified? Because he did, like, I know he got hanged, but like he was trying to free people who were, I don't know. I don't know what I'm asking. I think you get the point though. Like,
You mean
the
the attempt to seize the Harper's Ferry armory?
Yeah, and then arm slaves with it.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
I
think that's. I mean, they were being freaking enslaved. What else did they do?
Well, another thing too that gets ignored about that is that he was actually criticized by his fellow abolitionists because they felt, it's like, dude, you're gonna take all these weapons, then you're gonna destroy the factory, possibly putting people out of work, possibly killing people in the process. I think we should slow it down there a little bit.
I mean, at the time, it was an optics nightmare for the abolitionists, but like morally, it was probably
that was the problem Harriet Tubman had with it.
Yeah.
I mean, she wasn't against taking arms. She took arms herself. From reports, she was a pretty badass with a gun. You didn't want to mess with her, but she didn't want it to be. She didn't want it to be a violent thing because she kind of figured they'd lose.
If I recall correctly, even though Martin Luther King, was a diehard peace activist, he had a gun on him because he knew that.
Oh yeah, he had lots of guns.
Yeah, he knew that there was people out to get him, and that if push came to shove, he might have to protect his family and followers if someone showed up. But
not only that, that's just he's part of the South. There's a gun culture,
Yeah.
Especially back then.
Yeah,
I think the gain on my microphone keeps creeping up. I keep having to bump it down. Apologies if I end up.
It's funny we're talking about a Civil War because I would love you to one day, debunk, some of those videos by that guy Attention who does nothing but post videos insisting that the Civil War was 100% about slavery.
Is that the guy who dresses up like on one side of the screen he's a rebel and on the other side of the screen?
Yeah.
Oh god, that guy's an idiot.
My personal favorite fail of his is that he can prove that terrorists were not part of it because he says we have an actual historical document about tariff taxes going to the South. It's like, okay, let's see them, and he only brings up one, and it's for New York. It's like, what about Boston, Charlottesville? What about that? Oh, well, the New York one says the South wasn't being taxed any more than other places were. Yeah, but what about the other ports?
Yep.
I doubt there's not a lot of, there's not going to be a lot of southern places going to New York. They're going to be going to Boston or Charlottesville. Why are you looking at New York? And I still love, how when he did the whole lying about slavery, how everyone said, "Oh, but it was about slavery because these states declared that was the reason." Yeah, a couple of states did, and another thing too that often gets ignored is that they mentioned the want to keep slavery, but that was one out of like hundreds of other things they were complaining about. Yeah, they were saying, it's like, well, yeah, we want to keep our slaves, but we also want you guys to stop putting these taxes on us. Stop treating us like we're a territory and actually treat it. We're tired of you guys actually treating us like a territory rather than a state in the
My
union.
question though is like, if we were in a situation like, let's say the Confederates like seceded in the and the Union like just left them alone, right? Like, what should the slaves have done in that scenario? Should they have just been like, oh, okay, sucks to suck, right? Like, we're
Well,
just gonna
the abolitionists were making gains down there. Slavery was on the way out.
Yeah.
they were
The government was doing everything it can with like the fugitive slave laws and everything to try to keep it going, but they were kicking the can down the road. I mean, they weren't.
And here's another point too that I really want to bring up to people, when they talk about the Civil War. It's like, even if let's play your game and say the South wanted to secede because of slavery. The whole point of the Civil War wasn't about slavery; it was whether or not states could secede from the Union. The reason for seceding shouldn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and also they'll like, they just wanted to keep their slaves. Look at South Carolina. Well, South Carolina was one of, oh God, I can never remember how many states it was. Was
13.
it 11?
There's
13?
There was oh shit, yeah, I forgot.
I was thinking 11, but I don't know.
There's 7 in the Deep South and 4. No, you're right. It's 11, and then there's Missouri and Kentucky that tried to secede.
Yeah, and then Maryland was debating whether or not to secede, and then Lincoln sent in the troops to force them to vote his way. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh yeah, that's another thing too. If the Civil War was all about slavery, then how come states like Kentucky and Missouri fought for the Union even though they were slave states?
Well, how come which states? Oh yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah,
I think so. I think though when the
Delaware and
Emancipation
Maryland were
Proclamation-
slave states. Yeah.
But I think though when the Emancipation Proclamation passed, a lot of those pro like union but anti like pro slavery people like in those states, like a lot of those soldiers like left the army, right? Because they didn't want to be fighting for.
That's another myth about the Civil War. The Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves. No, it did shit.
It did. It was. Well, I mean, there wasn't.
It was nothing more than a political. It was nothing. It was nothing more than a political maneuver.
Yeah, he freed the slaves everywhere he couldn't, and didn't free them anywhere he could.
Yeah.
I don't think he had the constitutional power to, though. Like free the slaves in the places he had.
Well, yeah, because just to play the devil's advocate here, if you're gonna at the time, if you were gonna end slavery, you had to do it via the process of amendment. You couldn't just declare that's it, slavery's done with. Everyone hand over your slaves now.
Yeah.
And people are gonna say, "What? But this is slavery. It needs to end." Well, yeah, it's true. But listen, if we make an exception for one guy, what's gonna stop another guy from doing something similar?
But isn't it funny that most other countries that ended slavery, we're the only one that ended slavery with violence?
The other being Haiti, and
well, Haiti started because of a slave uprising. It's not quite the same thing, but
yeah.
But I mean,
by the way, another thing they don't talk about
all
Haiti,
these other countries are ending slavery all over the place, and they don't need to send troops anywhere.
Yeah. Funny thing though about Haiti, because I see so many documentaries about the Haitian Revolution, and a lot of them seem to ignore the fact that the first leaders of Haiti, they thought the best way to free all slaves and make sure slavery never occurred again, basically was to launch a white genocide. Yeah, the leader of the slave rebellion, he had troops go around, round up anyone who was white, regardless if they owned slaves or not, and he had them killed. In fact, some historians believe that's the reason why anti-abolitionism was somewhat strong in some states like Florida, was because they were afraid that was going to happen there.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of the way Lysander Spooner put it, because he made a very good case that it was really about subjugating the South, And as long as they could subjugate the South by supporting slavery, they would. As soon as they weren't able to do that, they would use the slaves against them.
Hell, that's what Abraham Lincoln more or less said. You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
one of his aides tried to
yeah.
one of his aides tried to say, "Hey, we should make this an abolitionist crusade. We should tell the rest of the world, we're trying to free slaves." And Lincoln said, "Yeah, but if I did that, we'd be lying because let's be real here. If I can preserve the Union without freeing a single slave, I'll do it."
I think that's a bit of a misinterpretation, though, because like Lincoln, I think knew that. I think it's pretty clear Lincoln for a long time was at least in favor of restricting slavery, right? Like generally, his view was like we gotta get rid of slavery in the long run by just restricting it to the South. And I think at the beginning of the Civil War, he realized if he went for the like what the radicals were telling him and just like declared this was about like because at the time there were like border states and they could have, and at that point I think his thought process was, even if it was wrong, even if slavery was dying anyway in the South, his thought process was, okay, in order to keep the Union in order to end slavery, we need to keep the Union together. In order to do that, we need to keep the border states on our side. In order to do that, we have to first start out by like not being overtly like anti-slavery. I don't know, because I know there were like people like Thaddeus Stevens and stuff that were telling him to do that, but I think he kind of just saw that it was not good, like strategically. I don't think he had like a vested interest in like, oh, like this is the only thing I care about. I think that's a bit too simplistic.
Mm. Well, I will
Yep,
give Abraham
Robert E.
Lincoln
Lee
some-
was an abolitionist. Yep.
Yeah.
He still had slaves while he was alive, though, right? Like that's a bit. I don't know. Like you could believe in something, and then you could be a total hypocrite.
There were all sorts of legal barriers in the way of manumission, and it was even at the point where it was really difficult to do it in your will. And at one point, Lee was like an executor for someone's estate, and the guy just wanted his slaves freed, when he died. But you couldn't do that. You had to, wait 5 years, I think it was, for people to make claims against the estate. And if the claims couldn't be met with other assets, you had to use the slaves for that.
Yeah.
And
that's
so
the reason
Lee spent the whole 5 years trying to get those slaves freed. Just ran into barrier after barrier, and they just kept him from doing it until the clock ran out on the 5 years, and then they were freed.
The problem is, though, even if you like accept that, like I don't know, I feel like Lee is often the prominent like face of like the Southern like rebellion, but like there's also a lot of other questionable, like Nathan Bedford Forrest was like a huge person. He was just an awful person.
He was a horrible person.
Well, yeah, I mean,
and Jefferson Davis wasn't all that great either.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty funny, though, because so many people love to talk about how Stonewall Jackson did this, and even Attention was guilty of it. It's like, yeah, Stonewall Jackson, all those other crazy people, but guess what? There were crazy guys on the Union side, too. I mean, just look at General Sherman.
Oh, God.
Did Sherman massacre like thousands of POWs, though? Like I don't know. Like I feel like there's
I don't know about POWs, but yeah, he killed a lot of people just burning the South as he went through the Sherman's march to the sea.
I mean, and I will say, and and here's another thing too about Robert E. Lee, about alternate history. Had things been a little bit different, Robert E. Lee would have had General Grant's job. Because if I recall correctly, initially he was actually for,
he was against secession until his state seceded, and then he did.
He was actually all for, the Union until his state.
He struggled.
Well, he wasn't for the Northern aggression in the war.
Yeah. Yeah, it was when he was against secession, but then when he saw, how the Union was reacting to the states seceding, he started criticizing it, and finally when his home state seceded, he ultimately made a tough decision and decided, what, if, unfortunately there's going to be a war and I don't want to be, destroying my own home state, so he resigned from his position and joined the Confederacy.
Someone tell me how my cam is looking. I'm seeing a few dropped frames, and I just want to make sure it's keeping up. If it's not, just let me know, and I'll shut it off, and I'll do it audio only the rest of the night. But if you can see my motion there, good.
It's another misconception that a lot of alternate historians like to think. If the United Kingdom had joined the United Kingdom was somewhat pro-Confederacy, and had they gotten involved, the Confederacy would have won.
They
Well,
probably would have though, right? Like there were certain points at which like the Confederacy's like best way of winning was always going to be hold out until either A, the North got tired and voted out like Lincoln or the other Republican politicians, or B, like win a major victory and like get foreign recognition and like help
well,
from the British or
the
French, right? Like that's
the
why
reason,
Lee went into Gettysburg and Antietam. He was trying to achieve that big victory on northern soil and
well,
he was
the
trying to
reason
get like
why
sorry, go ahead.
Okay, well, the reason why that wouldn't have worked was for two reasons. One, while yes, the British, did get a lot of valuable materials from the South, the North was just as valuable as a trade partner too. And if they joined the South, they would have lost to the North as a trade partner. And two, the Union had allies too, particularly with Russia. That's the thing that doesn't get talked about is that Russia actually played a big role in the American Civil War by keeping the other nations away. In fact, when Britain with that naval affair they had when Britain looked like it was going to get involved to the north, Russia actually deployed some naval vessels and basically more or less said, hey, listen, Britain, if you get involved in this, we're going to get involved in this. So really, from the United Kingdom
Right.
standpoint, the best solution was not to
Well,
recognize the South and stay out of the war.
well, yeah,
But that's
but that's
another good piece of evidence, though, for why slavery wasn't the main thing about it, because they were trying to make a treaty that said that if the Confederacy was recognized by both France and Britain, that they would free the slaves in perpetuity.
they did that very late on, though, right? Like when
Yeah,
the
like
Confederacy was already
1864.
dying.
It was
Yeah,
like
when the
less than a
Confederacy
year
was
before the end of the
yeah,
war. Yeah.
right, and the Confederacy was like so desperate at that point they even made legislation allowing slaves to fight, which would have been
Yeah.
inconceivable. Like so
Well, it
like
wasn't inconceivable because it was happening and it was kind of an open secret, and they were finally like, okay, fine, let's just
weren't like
acknowledge it.
most like what like prominent weren't wasn't most of the white Southern public like heavily like against it though when
Oh
when
yeah,
Lincoln allowed the Union to enlist African Americans, like they not only were heavily against it, they treated African American POWs like awfully, like way worse than like any like kind of like any it like even or like yeah, I don't know.
if they even took
Like
him as POWs and didn't just kill
right,
him
yeah.
outright.
Right, and often they'd sell them to slavery, I'm pretty sure, right? Like if they did capture
Yeah.
them. Yeah. So yeah. I mean, I don't know. My thing is though, I feel like the UK, like you're right, Darth, in that if that was their like if they were acting perfectly and they're like rational, like hey, this is how foreign policy works, that would be the case. But the UK and France, like especially the UK, public opinion was very split, right? Like you had a lot of the aristocracy, as far as I could have read, I might be wrong. A lot of the aristocracy, upper class, supported the Confederacy, and a lot of the labor movement in the UK supported the Union. Like there was a lot of factional like things about like, oh hey, this is what we should do in this conflict. And if one thing had tipped the scale, if like the Confederacy had won one battle or things like that, the side like regardless of how rational it was, because of how public emotion would have gone, the other side that they would have sided with that side, right? Like that's the thing about you know having a parliamentary government or whatever. It's like you're never gonna exactly act in like what is specifically what should be your best interest. I don't know.
Mm.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, other than if that wasn't the reason, if there was no realistic reason for Britain to help the South, then Robert E. Lee, frankly, never would have invaded Maryland or Pennsylvania. It was a pretty big gamble, right? Like he was going to enemy territory as like a
Yeah.
smaller country. It's like a really big gamble. You do that when you think that you can achieve something, like you can risk it, you can gamble it, and then you can achieve foreign recognition. You don't do that just to win a victory. That's not
Well,
how. Yeah.
many historians have argued the reason why the South lost the war was because of that. They were being a little too aggressive, and I don't mean aggressive as in they were, launching wars and all that, but they
Right.
thought the strategy was okay. Let's try to take the border states and use them as leverage. But when
It's
what they
not just taking, yeah, they just tried
when
to
what
defend every single piece of land.
can
Yeah.
I finish? Yeah.
Sorry.
When what they should have done is when what some historians said if they wanted to stand at least a practical chance of winning, what they should have done is they should have secured their borders, locked themselves down, and basically said, okay, North, you want to declare war on us, come get us, and basically bog them down until, like you said, the people were like, okay, this war's going nowhere. we're not getting anywhere. We're done with this. Lincoln, either end the war now or we're voting you out of office, and we're gonna end the war. Because that almost did
Yeah, because
happen. That
the
almost
problem is so many of the battles were fought in the South. The South lost a lot
Yeah.
of infrastructure because of that, and
Especially
it was more
in
of
the
it was more of
West,
an
like
economic loss than a military loss.
yeah.
yeah, especially in the West, like the
Oh yeah,
South didn't really. What?
I was about to
What?
say, because Shane mentioned this, when we were talking about when he did the quickie on the Magnifier fallacy. On paper, it looks like the South won because they
Yep.
dominated most of the battles. They won a pretty
I
good.
don't know if that's true though. I don't know if that's
It,
true. On
it,
the
it pretty much is,
Virginia,
yeah.
in Virginia, they won most of the battles, right, with the Army of the Potomac. But like in the West, in Tennessee and like Mississippi and Alabama, they lost a ton of battles. That was actually a big reason why they lost, because they lost Fort Henry and Donelson in Tennessee, and then they lost Vicksburg, and
Well,
then they lost
well,
Atlanta, and
well,
like all these battles kind of just crippled. Like they just severed the Confederacy in two and
well,
three, and then
again, again, and as we were pointing out, yes, they won a lot of battles in the short term. In the short term, they dominated the battlefield, and to a person falling for the McNamara fallacy, you would think, oh yeah, they're going to win this war because they're very close to Washington D.C. They've got all this units, but the North, even when the North lost, they were still able to inflict massive damage on their infrastructure. So when the North launched their counterattacks, the southern armies were forced to fight, and they realized, okay, where's our ammunition? Well, we
they
don't
didn't
have
have any.
yeah, we don't
Mhm.
have any. We don't have any because the North, when they retreated, destroyed all our factories.
Right.
Yep.
That was a common thing the North did. Even when they were going to lose, a common thing that the Northern armies would do is that if they couldn't hold a city, they would say, "Okay, guys, we can't hold the city, but before you go, I want you to go to the train stations, the lumber yards, everything, and just burn them down."
To be fair, that's the Confederacy also did that with railroad tracks, right? Because they knew the Union Army was heavily dependent on railroad tracks to like supply their men. So
I mean, that's
like
what
Mason
everyone
Bedford
does in war.
Forest,
You take out
yeah,
you take out the railroads, you take out the bridges.
Yep.
right.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
I gotta head off, but it was really nice talking to you guys. Have
Yeah,
fun.
good to have you, Tangelo.
Yep. See you guys later. Bye.
See ya.
See- Yeah. Oh yeah, that is true too, consumer. The Confederacy had less casualties as well. Although,
Yeah.
to be fair, that's because the South in general had a lower population than the North. So
But again, if you're just talking about the McNamara fallacy and you're just looking at, body counts, if that's all you're looking at, then the South kicked butt.
oh yeah, exactly.
They kicked Yankee tail all over the place, but that
Yeah.
doesn't win you the war.
Oh yeah, exactly. Actually, ironically, in TIK history, and actually quite a few other historians have pointed this out, by judging by the McNamara fallacy. If you go by the McNamara fallacy, now granted, one would argue this doesn't count because they still lost, but in World War II, according to the McNamara fallacy, Germany should have been curb stomped the moment they entered the Soviet Union because the Soviet army was bigger, they had better tanks, they had more infrastructure. But the reason why they didn't work was because Russia was not prepared to fight a war, but Germany was, and they were determined to win, which is why the Germans dominated in the early years of Barbarossa.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like TIK history too. It's another thing that TIK history does with his videos that I really wish so many people would actually do when they talk about these whole what if scenarios. People, the economic principle applies even in war. You can't ignore it.
Oh, yeah.
That's actually something TIK history addressed in a lot of his videos. One thing that really grinds his gears is people who say, "Oh, we shouldn't talk about the German economy and Nazi Germany during World War II because it wasn't anything special. It's not worth it's not worth it's not worth talking about." It's like, what do you mean? I mean, I mentioned this before in the chat, but I think I know the true reason why Hitler is so hated in the grand scheme of history, and it's not because of the Holocaust. It's because he basically was the guy that destroyed, the illusion. Because people fail to realize when Hitler took power, he was doing everything that so many political philosophers and theorists were saying. That's what you want to do if you want your nation to succeed, and he didn't succeed. he drove his economy to the ground and led the German people to death and destruction.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't sustainable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just trying to catch up on a couple of things we were talking about. The only movement I'm seeing in the news about Russian troops in Ukraine is in the separatist regions.
Yeah. JC says, "Can I
Oh,
go?" And while no one is what?
Here's a pot kettle moment. CNN is saying that Fox News has been repeatedly inaccurate in its coverage of the Canadian Freedom Convoy.
Yeah. In all honesty, the reason why I trust Fox more than I trust that, and I've actually heard a lot of people say this, and I kind of agree with them, is that for the most part, Fox is somewhat open about its conservative bias. Like they open up and they say, "Yeah, we support Republicans and all that." They're not like CNN or MSNBC where they're like, "Oh no, we tell nothing but the truth." Mm.
Oh yeah, they're trying to downplay that trampling because, well, she didn't die. You trampled her with a horse. You heard about that woman?
No,
Did you hear
I
about
haven't.
that? Yeah.
No,
There was this woman that's an older woman. I think she was a First Nation woman with a walker. And they're just sending the horses through. And of course, the crowd's parting. But I mean, she's in a walker and she couldn't get out of the way. And this is on video. They just run right over her. Horse tramples her and she got sent to the hospital.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone's reaction, they couldn't believe it. It's like, why did you just do that? And here's the thing about horses. Horses do not want to trample you. Horses will try everything they can to avoid stepping on you. The fact that she was only injured and she wasn't killed or hurt worse than she was has more to do with restraint on the part of the horse than the rider.
Yeah. It's kind of like that one controversy. Granted, it happened I think like a decade or so ago, where the British Royal Guards, those guys with the big hats and all that, they got into trouble because the Royal Guards are trained. You are not to stop when you are marching or pacing. You are not to stop. You are not to stop, and you got to get over, and you got to walk over or get over whatever obstacles in your way. Well, there was an older guy, who couldn't walk as well, and he was also hard of hearing. And there was a parade going on, but he didn't notice. And a Royal Guardsman walked by, and he just said, "Make way for her, guard," but it's pretty clear the guy didn't hear him, and they just punched him and pushed him out of the way. And people are like, why the f did you do that? And everyone was defending them. They're like, well, they're Royal Guards, they got to do their duty. They can't do that. They have to move forward. It's like, no, they could have tapped him and said, "Hey, get out of our way." No, they were just like, "Make way," but without actually checking to see if he actually heard the message.
Well, they are
Speaking of which,
spinning and spinning and spinning. Okay, and there was this thing that Reuters live streamed on Twitter that was a meeting in Parliament about that, where Trudeau was supposed to be asking about. And if you ever thought that people in Congress were just a bunch of immature, narcissistic brats, apparently that's nothing compared to the Canadian Parliament. If what I saw is at all typical up there.
Yeah. Well, no, JC, because the White House is still technically being used, so
Yeah, you didn't make first use of it.
yeah. Yeah, people, there's a huge difference between homesteading and squatting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has to be unused.
Yeah. I hate it when it's like that, when you hear stories about those people that go into those houses and mansions and they just trash the place, and they're like, "Well, you weren't using it." It's like, yeah, but we were still planning on selling it.
Yeah.
when we say not using it, that basically means you just abandon it. Like, you even forget you even own it,
Yeah,
then you can
it's not about what's happening right now. It's about what you're intending in the future.
Yeah.
But that's where the concept of right of way comes from, because if there's a trail that people are using it to get to point A to point B, and you want to put a farm on that property, you can homestead the property, but you can't homestead that trail. You have to let people continue to use it, to get from one place to another, because you're not making first use of that. Maybe no one was. Maybe it was an Indian trail or even a deer trail before that. And there's no particular owner, but people are using it. So that's where right of way comes from.
Yeah, fuck. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I hate squatters. Like, I've seen some pretty sad, tragic stories. Like, there was that one story I saw on Reason where, like, there was that one Asian business owner who was trying, he had finally saved up enough money to build his dream home, and now he still needed to do some final stuff, so he couldn't move in right away. And what happened was a rich college student, who dropped out of school, went in there and squatted there, and apparently, according to New York law, they couldn't evict him. And, this Asian, this guy was still paying the property tax. He was still paying and all that. And meanwhile, the squatter was paying nothing. And it's like, just sucks, And the thing about Reason TV, and I hate how, like, that self-entitled girl who was defending the squatter, like, how self-entitled she was. Mm. I don't want to sound like an old man or anything, but, like, some of the people of my generation, we are just spoiled rotten. I think that's the reason why we have the SJW movement and all those, because in the 90s and early 2000s, we were spoiled rotten. We were told, "Oh, you're special, you can do this, you can do that, you can do that," and all that. Well, we grow up and we realize we can't get that.
Yep.
Yeah, if I ever come across an SJW and they start ringing at me, I'm just gonna flat out say, something tells me when you were a kid and you were having tantrums at the grocery store, your parents just gave you a candy bar to shut you up, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's not that difficult to raise your kids so they don't do that.
Yeah.
And you don't have to spank them or anything like that to do it.
Yeah.
You just kind of lay it down with them.
I was seeing one comedian, all that, and he was talking about that, I think so, and he was jokingly saying, what grinds my gears about bad parents is that their kid's throwing a tantrum and they're screaming at that, and they're acting all embarrassed, and you ask them, it's like, why are you giving them candy to make them shut up? It's like, well, because it's embarrassing. They're making a scene and all. It's like, lady, we don't care that your kid is screaming and yelling. We understand kids do that, but we're judging you for is that you're not doing anything about it.
Yep.
You don't got to smack the kid or anything, but you do something. Don't let him sit there screaming, going, "I want candy, I want candy." No, you just put it, get down to his level and say, "Hey, that is enough. Stop this right now, or we're leaving."
Just say that's not how you get what you want. And if you keep it up, I'm not even going to buy the things I was going to buy for you.
Yeah.
And we'll just leave right now and not get anything.
Yeah,
They'll learn.
Yeah, that's the thing. When your kid's having a tantrum and people are judging you, they're not judging you because your kid's having a tantrum. They're judging you because, like I said, they're screaming around and you're just sitting there like, duh, what do I do? What do I do? Here, if I give you candy, will you shut up? It's like, and that's what we're judging you for.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when I was finally able to get the kids from my ex, she had been raising them basically on chicken nuggets and, those little mini pizzas that you put in the microwave, and that was all they wanted to eat. I was trying to get them the other things, and it was all I was finally like, look, you kids cannot live on this stuff. Here's the deal. I will have food in this house. You will not starve except by your own choice. You will eat what I prepare for you, or you can, look in the fridge and find something else, or you can go hungry that night. And my daughter tried to call me on that once. I'm like, okay, it's up to you. If you go to bed hungry, I've got food for you. If you go to bed hungry, it's your own fault. And she, had a little snit, went off and told me later that, she was thinking like, he's got a cave. he's going to cave. He's not going to let me go to bed hungry. I'll let her go to bed hungry, and she didn't do that again.
Yeah.
And that's child abuse. Well, is it better or worse than having her have this crappy, terrible diet that's going to make her the size of a barn and really unhealthy?
Yeah. And not to mention, even if it doesn't do that, like you said, she'll grow up to be an SJW because she'll never know what it's like to learn no. So when reality hits her, when she first hears someone, when she's like, I want this, and the person says, no, I'm not going to give you that, she's going to throw a fit, as an adult,
Yep.
That's why a lot of these, SJWs, they look like they're throwing a tantrum because, in all honesty, I think that's all they know how to react to a situation like that because their parents didn't teach them that,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, their parents didn't sit them down. They didn't
learn how to negotiate for what they want. They didn't learn how to resolve disputes among themselves or anything like that.
Yep, and they didn't learn another important lesson, which is you're not always going to get what you want. You just got to learn to sit down and put up with that,
And being raised on things like participation trophies and things like that. No, kids need to know what it's like to lose.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said in your quickie, if they don't know what it's like to lose, then winning means nothing to them,
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's what you're seeing right now, why they just can't let go of, certain political issues that should be a complete victory for them.
Yeah,
Because it's not about winning and losing to them, it's about the fight. They don't understand winning and losing.
Yeah,
the equal pay for women is the thing. They are still insisting that there's not equal pay. It's like, look, there's been study after study after study. Even ones that the Obama administration did, even the ones that, these big SJW feminists do, they keep finding that as long as you account for all of the different variables, it equalizes out. It's only when you leave a lot of those out that a disparity shows up. And then you look at it, it's like, wait a minute, what about this? What about that? What about this other thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a parent myself, and even I can tell you that. Though to be fair, one thing I'm seeing a lot, especially like with school districts, because one common criticism I also hate, because I am seeing this from a lot of people, and they're saying this is why the schools need need to teach young children all about diversity and and all about that inappropriate stuff about, like, there was that one sick video they did where they were basically telling kids how to masturbate and all that, and it's like, listen, people, I'm not saying that stuff isn't important, but that should be up to the parent to determine when to talk about it. But they're like, oh, parents never do that. It's like, they don't, you heard of that video, right, Shane? That one, where it was like that animated and they were telling 6-year-old kids about, oh, this is how you touch yourself and all that, And to be fair, because some people did make a pretty good point saying, well, kids do kind of need to learn about that area of their body at some point or another. And I'm like, yeah, but
they'll figure that part out on their own. That's not the issue.
They can figure that part on their own. And another reason too is it's like, listen, the parents weren't told about that, and it really should be up to the parents to really determine when they need to have that talk with them,
Yeah, actually, there's a couple from Pipsqueak. I'm going to get to lean back up and do this one. Kids are smart enough to know when they're getting a trophy for nothing. And yeah, they found that out like on Little League games where they don't give them a first prize or anything. They just give them participation ribbons or whatever. They look after them. They look in the trash, and the kids threw them all away.
Oh, yeah.
Because it didn't mean anything. And he also says, ever notice how the most well-loved children's shows don't treat the audience like they have a single-digit IQ? Yep.
Oh yeah, I actually heard this perfectly well. A perfectly good example to show that you made a kid's show well is if an adult can enjoy it on their own.
Yep.
On their own, That's why Sesame Street.
Well, because first of all, you want the adults to watch it with their kids.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And I think it was Andrew Stanton. He directed Finding Nemo, but he was taking his kid to daycare. And one of the other parents said, "Well, I took my kid to see Finding Nemo. my kid loved it and I did too. And he said, great, because I made it for you, not them.
Oh yeah, I mean, if I recall correctly, Chuck Jones once said that when people asked him how his cartoons, could reach so many people in the hearts of children, and they said, "We didn't make those cartoons for the children; we made them for
No,
ourselves."
they had no concept of making. They were surprised, like in the 60s and 70s, when people were saying, "Oh, like this is children's stuff." They're like, "No, we never did that for children."
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, if I recall
Oh,
correctly,
hang on, $10 from Darius Thurman. Thank you so much, Darius. He asks, is America becoming more libertarian? Anti-war, anti-drug war, and open carry sentiment are more popular than ever, but welfare addiction and spending are at all-time highs. Is fiscal conservatism dead? What do you think about that?
Well, to be fair, when it comes to welfare and spending, in today's day and age, I don't blame people for doing that nowadays, because the sad reality is that there's still plenty of states where people are on welfare because simply the government won't let them work. They're told, "Oh
Yeah,
no, you gotta do this, you gotta get your shot, you gotta do this and that." Like no joke, there are people that are saying, "Listen, wearing a mask, especially in like a warehouse job where they gotta lift and heavy load a lot of stuff, it's affecting their ability to work because it hampers their breathing, so they have struggle to breathe." So a lot of people are
yeah.
taking welfare now simply because they literally have no choice. The government won't let them work.
Well, and even absent that, things like minimum wage, if you have someone who's, poor, inexperienced, has a criminal record or whatever, they're not allowed to undercut the competition and say, hey, I'll work for, $6 an hour instead of 7.15 or whatever it is. They don't have the ability to do that, so they can't really compete in the job market, so they don't get jobs. So what else are they left with?
Yeah, it actually reminds me of this one controversial study that was done, where they were doing a study because they were trying to figure out why so many, convicted, sexual offenders, why were they committing all these crimes, the majority of which were non-sexual, and they found out the reason why is because thanks to Megan's Law, they literally can't find a place and they can't get a job pretty much anywhere. So they literally have no choice but to resort to petty theft and all that because they literally can't do anything else, and they're just trying to survive. They
Yep.
can't even get welfare because of their conviction, which limits how much welfare they can get. It's one of those cases where, we don't condone what they're doing, but you can't blame them for doing it because from their point of view, if they don't steal, they're going to starve.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I still find it so ironic that Megan's Law was signed by Bill Clinton, considering what we know about that guy.
Oh, God.
I mean, call me mean or something, but I would love to get a time machine, go back in time, and bomb the big signing of it by showing videos of Clinton getting it naughty with some questionable people, and then he's gonna sit there, they're bluish and all that.
Mm,
I mean, it's easy to blame the parents, of Megan for doing that, but to be fair, they were grieving, and when you're
yeah.
grieving, you don't act rationally.
Ooh,
I mean, I heard.
another 10 from Darius. If I can, it's not showing up that big. Okay, well, it is on the side. So he says, oh, yeah, 90s and 2000 cartoons were awesome. X-Men, Batman, Gargoyle, Spider-Man, Samurai Jack. They had depth and they weren't 2D and predictable like in the 60s. Yeah, Batman the Animated Series is definitely made for adults.
Oh yeah.
Chat's hopping tonight. I don't know if it's just Mondays or if it's just today or what.
Yeah, it's yeah. But yeah, going back to what I said, it's like, yeah, I mean, Megan's parents, they were grieving, so they weren't acting rationally. I
Yeah,
mean, it kind of
but I
reminds me
mean
of this.
that's the wrong people that should be doing that.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
that's the point where you're the least likely to consider a logical, rational, reasoned response. You're going completely on emotion.
Fun fact. A lot of financial advisors say that's why when someone you love and care for passes away, you should never actually go out and make funeral arrangements yourself. You should get someone
Hmm.
like who knows you and is good friends with you, but they're emotionally neutral to the situation because you're grieving, you're sad you lost grandpa, and it's easier for a
And
guy
they
to say,
will take advantage of you.
yeah. Oh yeah, they'll say, "Oh, I know what it's like to lose your grandfather. Here, let's give you this. Let's give you this coffin. It's lined with this for perfect comfort and beauty and all that." Where the emotional friend could say,
Well, and
he's dead.
it's fine. I know it's $5,000, but wouldn't you want that for your dear grandpa? You know.
Yeah. Whereas the emotionally neutral person can say, "Look, we want to bury him with dignity, but he's dead. Why does he need this
Yeah.
comfortable, expensive linen on his coffin? He's dead."
Yep.
And I mean, if you believe in the whole afterlife or anything, he's not going to stay in the coffin for there. He's going to go to wherever, you think he's going to go. He's dead.
Yeah. I mean, it's bizarre because in the worldviews, either your soul leaves your body and you go to heaven or somewhere, or you're reincarnated somewhere else, or you're just dead and you stop existing. What sort of worldview actually has them still in their body? I mean, we have expressions like that, sleeping in the grave, rest in peace, here lies, and so on like that. But there aren't actually any belief systems, are there, that do that?
I mean, I do know like some radical sects of radical sects. No, I didn't say sex. I meant sect as an SECT. Yeah. I know there's some like groups like Jehovah's Witnesses where they actually believe that when you die, you literally stay in the ground and you basically sleep there and you're not resurrected and go to heaven until Jesus comes back, which is any minute now.
That's I think that's a Catholic thing, isn't it? Where you have to be buried facing east and all that.
Yeah, I know. They're like, and it's like that's why Catholics don't cremate, because you can't be resurrected if you're burned to a crisp. Well, what if the person died in a house fire?
Oh, a friend of mine in high school, his family was, I think, Episcopalian, and his father died, and just to save money because they didn't have much money, they were poor, and so they cremated him and just put him in an urn, and all the Episcopalians, they were horrified. It's like, how could you do that to him? How's his soul going to get out of that urn? It's like, are you people insane?
Yeah, it's like, listen, if that stuff is true about them, he'd be a freaking ghost. He can just phase through.
Yeah. I mean, he can get out of a coffin that's made of metal 6 feet under the ground, but he can't get out of a ceramic urn sitting on a shelf.
Yeah. Yeah, fun fact, up until modern day history, when we better understood medicine, a lot of coffins were actually rigged with a bell that you could ring, because it wasn't unheard of for people to be buried alive. Like, so many people hear stories about how, this historical person was afraid of being buried alive. How crazy. Well, back then, that actually happened more often than you realize it did.
Well, and that's also why you didn't bury someone for like 3 days or something.
Yeah. Yeah, because you had to make sure like they were actually dead and not just in a deep comatose like state,
And so what you would do, you didn't have living rooms, 100 years ago you had the parlor, and the person would lie in state in the parlor. You didn't have, a funeral home or anything like that. They would just lie in state, and they'd just be. And
I actually did see a funny parody of the resurrection of Jesus one time. Where it shows Jesus coming out, and they're like, "It's a miracle, our Savior, you survived." And he goes, "I was never dead to begin with, you idiots. I was in a coma." Yeah. Yeah, I was never dead to begin with. I was in a coma. Just because a person goes, and closes their eyes doesn't mean they're dead.
I think it was a Twilight Zone where that happened, and the guy, they're having the funeral, he's in the coffin, and he just sits up and is like, what? And so there's this big debate on the town, and half of them want to, burn him as a witch or whatever, or banish him as a demon and things like that. And he finally convinces his, girlfriend that, look, I'm not a demon. Let's just get out of here. Let's go somewhere. And on the way out, he goes to light a cigarette, and the match lights without him striking it. And she said, did that match light without you striking it? It's like, if we're going to be together, you're going to have to stop imagining things.
Yeah.
Implying that he really was a demon when he came back.
I'll be right back. I gotta go to the bathroom.
All right. Let's see. We got Captain Pipsqueak. I know some fantasy writings where the dead will rise and take revenge if they're not buried properly. There's nothing more interesting to kids than seeing grown-ups do awesome stuff while also being relatable, which is seen by making them vulnerable. That's also something you'll see in a lot of the educational stuff for preschoolers. They won't have that many actual preschool kids, maybe a few, but a lot of the stuff that's done will be done by older kids, like 6 to 8 years old, because little kids imitate bigger kids. So.
Oh, yeah.
What do y'all think of Juice World? That's a new one on me.
I've never heard of Juice World.
Yeah, Avatar and Korra are great. The woman who does the voice for Korra is one of the writers for riff tracks and has actually done a few of the riffs.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of funny religious parodies out there, though. Like, I saw this one funny parody about Adam and Eve, and it says the real reason why Adam and Eve expelled from Eden, and that's because they gained self-awareness. And they're like, wait a minute, I'm naked? I'm naked? Yeah, I'm naked too. Well, you see, wait a minute, we were naked, just walking around with our stuff flying around there. We were doing all sorts of dirty, naughty stuff to each other, and you didn't tell us that we were being indecent? Well, you see, yeah, my tits were just flopping around out there, and you didn't tell me that? Well, you see, get out of here, you're banished!
Fishron says, want to make the case for the religion we started, the Kids of the Invisible Hand. Not familiar with that one either.
Yeah.
What types of music do y'all listen to, and who are y'all's favorite artists? I mean, I don't really do the superlative thing, and I'm very eclectic, so I'll say everyone from, Beethoven to, Oingo Boingo or whoever.
I did see a short little documentary about Kenny G and all that, and the funny irony is that he is one of the most well-loved and well-paid jazz musicians, but he's also the most hated, and ironically, like everyday people like him, but like the musical snoots are like, oh, he knows nothing about jazz, and I think the reason why Kenny G writes good music is because, believe it or not, it's actually because he doesn't understand jazz. He's not trying to come up with a technique or all that. He was interviewed and said, what was the inspiration for you to write this song? And he said, I was just playing around on my alto sax and it sounded nice.
Thought it sounded good. Yep.
Yeah, it sounded good. Which I agree. I mean, music does not have to be serious or have a hidden meaning behind it,
No.
It can be...
Not really a rap guy, Jason. You don't remember the joke religion I made on Discord where we would make a fake religion worshiping the invisible hand so we could escape taxes by leaving our jobs as places of worship?
No, you got to have a lot of...
I don't think that would work.
You got to have a lot of money and influence to get the church to get the government to recognize you as a religion.
Which is crazy because the only thing that is supposed to apply under the Constitution for a freedom of religion is that it's just a deeply held personal belief. It doesn't have to be part, of this recognized, organized religion. But, I mean, that's how I feel about free speech. That's how I feel about the right to keep and bear arms. So isn't it, a ban on... Isn't gun control then a ban on my exercise of free religion?
Yeah.
Darius is keeping the lights on this month. He says, although the Austrian school writes so much on entrepreneurship, there seem to be no economists actually starting and succeeding in businesses. Is that
Well,
true?
I wouldn't say that. And I mean, to be fair, I mean, it's like people will say, it's like, well, Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell, didn't start their own jobs as businesses. Well, first of all, they did. And second of all, they're university professors. They were university professors.
Yeah.
That is their job. You know,
Well, and Tom Woods has started a lot of businesses and has a lot of side hustles going.
yeah.
So I mean, what do you mean by succeeding in business? As long as you're paying the bills, I'd call that succeeding.
Yeah, look, not everyone is fit to be a business owner, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I got a couple businesses going, Rainbow.
Hmm.
I say businesses; they're all pretty much side hustles, but they accumulate
Yeah.
into paying the bills. So.
Yeah. I still remember that time when because I know you're an independent filmmaker, and I asked you, like, have you ever been harassed by a union? Thankfully, you haven't.
Well, no, this
I,
is a right to work state.
yeah, I've heard some horror stories of how unions treat independent film writers.
Oh God,
Yeah,
there's
it's like
there's no
people.
breaking into that if you're an indie.
Oh yeah, exactly. And if you try to, they will send people to your set, steal your equipment, or use their connections to local politicians to come and say, "Nope, you can't film here. You can't film here. You don't have the permits."
Well, see, most of mine is in my house, so yeah, go ahead and try that. It's a
Yeah.
residence, yeah.
kind of like the whole argument with Marxists. They're like, oh no, that's personal property, not private property. Yeah, but what if you work from home? What if you use your computer? What if you're a web designer and you use your own computer to design websites for a client? Then
Yep,
that does that mean your computer is no longer personal property?
yep.
Yeah,
I know, it doesn't make any sense.
yeah.
And I
Speaking of
think I
Japanese,
pretty much got the money together to expand the place and really set up the studio I want. The problem is this is a bad time to build anything.
well, Schism, the issue with the Japanese work culture is that Japan is very, very collectivistic with their social attitudes. The reason why Japanese people, work like, 12 to 15-hour shifts is not because, it's cutthroat competition and they have to do that if they want to stay a job. It's actually because they're very collective, and to not, work like that is seen as, oh, you're disloyal. How are you disloyal to
Mm-hmm.
these people who you work with all the time?
It really seems like it's kind of a holdover from the samurai. The business owners are the new samurai.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it goes all the way back. I mean, when the samurai and the shogun were overthrown, then the military took over, and those military guys took the command structure. I mean, it's really that's the problem with Japan. Isn't that they're capitalists? It's that they may be capitalist economically speaking, but socially they're still stuck in the feudalist way of thinking. I mean, fun fact, I've heard this from people that have actually worked in Japan. Japan, if you work like let's say you're working 8 to 5, but the boss is working 10 to 7, even when 5 o'clock rolls around, you stay until 7 o'clock because leaving before the boss is seen as disloyal and disrespectful. And you literally have to change your grammar and language in front of your boss. And we're not talking about like being polite and saying like Mr. Like you actually have to use language that historically was reserved for royalty on your boss because they're higher ups.
Yeah.
Another
I
thing too,
understand. I understand there's been some improvements compared to the way it was in like, the 60s and 70s or whatever.
yeah. And here's another thing too that people fail to realize about, Japanese work culture. Like so many people say it's capitalism, obviously. That's why people are falling over from overwork or committing suicide. But here's the thing. The same problem happens in China. You know, the same problems have been happening to China. It's really more of that region, Southeast Asia, that they have that feudalistic collective mindset of how, you're in a, even at work, you're in a caste system and you have to conform to whatever caste you're in. However, unlike China, it's actually kind of getting better in places like Japan. It's actually almost gone in South Korea, from what I've heard. Like like they've still got issues, but South Korea, has tried to stop, with the whole, you must respect your elders thing and all that.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of stuff right in that country, from what I understand.
Yeah. I mean, that's another issue with Japan too, is socially speaking, is that's how they are. It's like, people fail to realize like the Japanese, they are super duper formal almost to a fault. And like that's another thing too that Japan has that a lot of people would find tyrannical is like, you have to respect your elders, and it doesn't matter if your elders are wrong. If they say something, you have to actually somewhat agree with them because oh, they're older than you, so they've seen it.
I think that while capitalism is the best economics, but the idea of working yourself to live a grandier life and the constant use of credit to appear successful is stupid. Yeah, I mean, if you're doing that for all the show stuff, this is where the stuff in The Millionaire Next Door comes into play, because the people who are trying to live the affluent life in the nice neighborhood and drive the big fancy car, financially they don't end up doing so well, and you actually have a higher concentration of millionaires in middle class areas than you do in affluent areas, because they're saving their money. They're not paying exorbitant home prices and going massively into debt for this, high priced home. They're not driving big fancy cars. They're driving, Toyotas or whatever.
Yeah, I remember.
That's how they become millionaires.
I remember reading somewhere that Howard Hughes, the big business mogul, there were times where he would, it's like you think, it's like, oh, he's super rich. He must eat like filet mignon for breakfast every day. No, apparently, for the most part, he mostly lived off of bottled water and peanut butter sandwiches for the most part.
He was pretty much a hermit, but yeah, that guy is very atypical. He had some issues.
Well, I mean, I've heard this happen even before, his mental health declined, like even before that, he was actually a very simple guy. And like, when he went out to eat, he wouldn't order anything too fancy and all that,
Yeah. Well, there was this in The Millionaire Next Door or The Millionaire Mind? One of them. There was this thing where they were giving this talk on finances and all that. And the idea was they were bringing all these millionaires in to have a panel to talk about it. And so to accommodate, they had like 5 or 6 millionaires or however many it was they had put in. They had gotten the valet parking and all of these people, with the fancy tuxes and everything that cost, several $100s a day to rent. They made sure they had parking space for the limos. They had, the food in the back set up with a caviar and everything. And when these millionaires showed up, they were driving Honda Accords and pickup trucks. They parked themselves. None of them used the valet, service. That when they in the back, they ate, cheese and crackers. They didn't touch the caviar, and they just completely misjudged these millionaires. And so the panelists asked them why. It's like, how do you think we became millionaires? How do you think we stay millionaires? If we live the way you were thinking it, we'd end up being destitute, because no one can sustain that lifestyle. Unless you're like a super, super rich billionaire like Donald Trump, you're not going to be able to sustain that lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he was a billionaire. Fun fact about Howard Hughes, he invented Netflix in a way.
How you figure?
Yeah, what?
How do you figure?
Well, because what happened was that when his mental health declined and he went, into a recluse phase, he would live, he famously, as anyone, who's watched the movie knows, he famously lived in the upper half of a hotel that he owned. And, he was a big movie buff. So to help calm his mind and to get his mind off of, his OCD, he actually started a broadcasting company that would air movies and TV shows 24/7. And because he owned the place, he was in charge of it. And if he missed like a movie scene or something, or he was getting sick of the movie and wanted something different, he would literally call the place and say, hey, I missed my favorite part. Can you rewind it? Can you rewind it back 10 minutes? 10 minutes? Or it's like, you know what? I'm getting bored of this movie. Let's watch something else. And they would do it. They actually had to have a special line set up because other people were watching it too, and they were wondering, hey, why did my movie stop mid stop mid-show and rewind, and it was for them to say, "I'm sorry, our owner, missed his favorite part, so he wanted us to rewind." I mean, it wasn't
SKM's,
practical. It
yeah.
wasn't practical, but principally speaking, that's what Netflix is.
SKM, yeah, I always ask if they bought that house on credit and how much the net worth is. If they have zero savings and debt up to their eyeballs, they're screwed. Yeah. And that's why I was talking about, expanding this place for my studio. And we're going to do some other things as well, like expand the master bedroom and bath and things like that. But, it's like waiting until you get the money to do that and until the prices are good and everything. As opposed to, because I do not miss house payments. I will tell you that much. That's an albatross around my neck that I am glad is gone. So yeah. I don't even like car payments. I'll save up the money and get a good used car. These people who are like, they have to buy a new car every 2 years or whatever. It's like, that's ridiculous.
Oh, yeah. By the way, a lot of people, it's also kind of funny how people blame the free market for something that government did. Like, so many people, hate about, those predatory car payments with cars and all that. Well, to be fair, the reason why you do that is because, believe it or not, in many places it's actually illegal, because a lot of cars are going to be a couple $1,000s. It's actually illegal to have a couple $1,000s in cash on you, because if you're pulled over and they find that you've got a couple $100,000 on you, what are they going to do? Oh, this guy's a drug dealer.
Yep.
You can say all you want. No, I'm buying a used car and I'm going to pay for it with cash. No, you're smuggling drugs. We know it. And you're going to get convicted. It's like, yeah, he's a drug dealer because he had $10,000 in cash on him. Why would anyone have $10,000 in cash on them?
It's like, I was going to buy a car.
Yeah.
JC says, yeah, if you're going to buy something with debt, it's better to make money with debt instead of consuming all the time. It's like, yeah, but that's a stress I didn't want. I mean, I think if I'm going to do that and have the studio and have the debt from that and have this stress on me, like I have to get work in to make this debt. Whereas if I just spend it outright and then it doesn't bring in the money I think it does, well, I'm out the money I spent, but at least I'm not, completely underwater in debt. And I can do something else with the space, Kind
of reminds me of David Ramsey, the advisor and all that. It's so funny, like how so many people go to him and they're like, I'm stuck with all these debts and loans and all that I'm in there. And then he asks them, okay, well, what's your financial history? What do you do? And they mention about how they take out all these loans and they buy this stuff. And he's there saying, why the heck did you buy this stuff on those loans? That's a stupid thing to do.
Yeah, Fishron, I do not think it would work for me to try to set up a Tim Pool type podcast thing. It'd be cool, but I'm not in the right location. I'm not in the right anything for that.
Like one person said you should be on the Joe Rogan Experience, and I think the problem with that is that logistically that would be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Because he lives in California and you live in South Carolina. That's literally on the opposite end. What?
North Carolina.
Oh, North Carolina. Sorry. Yeah. That's literally on opposite ends of the states, Even if Joe Rogan agrees to pay for your travel expenses, that's going to take quite a few days before you get there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, SKM has a controversial opinion. We love those. I think gang-on-gang homicide should only be sentenced to 10 years maximum. The idea to just kill off all the gang members or something? What's the thinking on that?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, part of the reason why our prison is overpopulated is because we're literally throwing people, in for years, when easily, their sentence could easily be punished, by like community service or something,
Yes, Rainbow, I did get to see the eclipse in 2017. It was in total where we are. It was like 98% of an eclipse. So, but I had been through 2 total eclipses before, actual total eclipses. One when I was in elementary school. There's another when I was in high school, and there's been a few partials as well. So
yeah.
Yep, I've got my eclipse on. Then, of course, lunar eclipses. Gotta love those.
Oh, man, people talking about Joe Rogan. I mean, I'm sorry, Shane. I don't want to bring up any painful memories and or anything, but I'm just imagining, that meme that went around where like you're on the Joe Rogan show and you're explaining, the tragic car accident you were involved in that caused you to lose your second wife and to be put you in all the sorts of pain. And now I'm imagining Joe Rogan being like, "Wow, that's messed up, man. Have you ever tried DMT?"
Yeah, I'm not really gonna mess with the pain management rate. If it's a case where if it's legal for, that was the thing that really drives me crazy about like marijuana and all the other Schedule 1 stuff, that you're not even allowed to have a conversation with your doctor about it.
Yeah. Well, to
But
be
I mean,
fair,
I
though,
don't want to
DMT.
run. I don't want to run the risk of like something, interacting or whatever. And if it's legal, and approved and everything, then your doctor can say, okay, well, let's just try adding in a little bit. She actually tried that with me a few months ago. She was like, yeah, there's a new muscle relaxant out now that's really good. I was like, okay, let's try it. I tried it on a low dose. Oh man, that thing messed me up.
I still
I
can't. I still
love the
can't
muscle relaxing part, but everything else, oh man, my eyes couldn't focus. I just felt like I was being smacked in the head. It was not good.
I still can't believe though, Shane, like that one thing we did like a couple years ago where we were talking about the opioid wars. I think that was like back in 2019, and there were literally people on the comment section saying, "Shane, if you literally can't feel pain, are in constant pain, and you always feel pain when you're not on the drugs, I think you might be addicted to them. That's a sign of addiction."
No, it isn't.
Yeah,
No, it isn't.
yeah.
SKM, the reason I think it should be 10 years, gang members know the risk they took from joining. Are we really going to cry over thugs killing thugs?
Well, to be fair, the issue with gang violence isn't that the gangs are killing each other. It's that, unfortunately and very tragically, a lot of innocent people get killed in the crossfire.
Yeah.
It's like they go in there and it's like, oh, what?
Yeah, meanwhile, on a much more important issue, tomorrow is 2/22/22.
Yay. Yeah, that's a good point. Going Rainbow Asteroids. Shane, I think you're addicted to not being in pain. You need to see someone about that.
I am. It's called a pain management specialist.
Yeah.
No, the most recent one, Fish Run, is my third. Heather we're still together. Joey was the one I lost in the accident.
Yeah,
that was in 2006.
Tragically. Yeah. But I'm comfortable with making jokes like that because Shane has mentioned multiple times that he's done his grieving and he's far over it. So,
well, not over it. You never really get over it, but you just get on with your life.
Yeah, I mean, heck, you can still make drunk driving jokes. So,
yeah. That's an important part about it, to be able to laugh about it.
Oh yeah.
That's what drives me crazy about, oh, you can't tell that joke. Some people are tragic. Those are probably the people who need to hear it the most.
Oh yeah, because you mentioned, and you had this when you were grieving over Joe. Like there's times where you really wanted to cry, but the tears can't come out. But you find that laughing is a good way to get rid of those bottled up emotions.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Honey, I need to call you and warn you. There's a crazy drunk driver driving on the wrong side of the road causing accidents. Well, you're telling me there's hundreds of them.
What? There's hundreds of them.
Yeah.
Guys, zooming down the road in the middle of the night, just stoned out of his mind, and cop pulls him over and says, "Where are you going in such a hurry?" I'm going to a lecture. Now, who on earth gives a lecture at this time of night? My wife.
Yeah, kind of reminds me of this one drunk joke that Gilbert Gottfried told, where it's like a guy goes to a bar and he overdoes it, does it with the vodka, and he gets sick all over his shirt. He's like, "Oh no, if my wife sees this, she's gonna get mad because she's gonna accuse me of overdoing it again. Oh, I don't want to face that." And one guy says, "Hey, don't worry, I know the perfect solution. Perfect solution. Take a $10 bill from your wallet and put it in your pocket. Tell you that a really drunk guy came up to you, got sick all over your new shirt, and he felt so bad he gave you $10 so you can go get it clean." And he's like, "Okay, I'll do that." So he does that, and he goes home, and his wife notices that, and she's like, why is there sick on your shirt? Did you overdo it on the drinking again? And he's like, no, honey. See, I was just having one drink, and this guy who was really drunk, he came up to me and he got sick all over. So he gave me this $10 bill so I can get it cleaned. Later, she's like, oh, what is that smell? And the guy goes, oh yeah, he also crapped in my pants.
Yeah. All right, Darius Thurman becoming my favorite person here, another $20. He says, I question the claim 85% of convicts are because of the drug war. Many drug arrests are plea deals. Yeah, most convictions are plea deals. And
yeah, that's the reason why when they charge you for a crime, they don't just charge you for the one crime you committed. They say, oh, you were also evading arrest and you had a weapon, so that's doing it with a deadly weapon. The whole point is that way they're going to be like, if you're convicted of all these charges, you're going to be there for 30 years in jail and have to pay a $10,000 fine. Here's the deal. You plead with me and don't fight the charges, and I'll only charge you for that one crime, and you'll only spend 5 years in jail and won't have to pay a fine.
Yep. That's how they do it. They pile on a lot of bogus charges, most of which they probably know they're not going to get, but it scares people into taking it. Someone commits a violent act but takes a drug charge for less crime. Also, the 1970 drug war can't explain the 1960s crime wave. That's a good point.
Well, to be fair, there was a drug war over the before the 1970s.
Well, drugs were illegal, but it wasn't really the war on drugs until Nixon.
Yeah. I've even heard, back in the old days, I've heard from a lot of people, drunk driving was illegal, but they didn't treat it like it was, like it was a major issue like it is today. It was just like if you were caught drinking, if you didn't hurt anyone, it would be like, okay, Mr. Brandon, get in my police cruiser. I'm driving you home, bend you home. And then they drive you home and they say, okay, here's where we left your car. In the morning when you sober up, come claim your car. But nowadays, when that happens, there's pressure to say, no, you got to arrest them and throw them in jail.
Yep. Rainbow Asteroids asks, how aren't plea deals illegal? For the same reason that confessions aren't illegal and all sorts of things that should be illegal aren't. Because prosecutors are basically the hidden power behind this country. They write most of the laws. They enforce most of the laws. They cheat all the time and have full immunity, not even qualified immunity. I mean, if you actually look into what prosecutors routinely do and get away with it and how much power they have over who gets arrested, who gets charged, pretty much all of the judges are former prosecutors. There was a lawyer, a defense attorney who did some work for me. It wasn't, anything major, a couple of minor things I didn't even do. He was like, yeah, we'll take care of this. But he wanted to be a judge, and he'd been a defense attorney for 20 years, whatever it was. He had to spend a couple of years as a prosecutor to become a judge. It's not really a requirement, but if you're not a prosecutor for at least a couple of years, you don't become a judge.
Yeah, they're going to be like, you're soft on crime.
Well, and he might think, well, yeah, that's where all that comes from. The soft on crime stuff comes from prosecutors. But you might think, okay, maybe that makes sense. They have to have spent time on, both sides to be able to do it, but it doesn't go the other way around. There are plenty of judges who are prosecutors for decades, never spent one day as a defense attorney. So the deck is very much stacked.
Oh, yeah. Doesn't help the fact that, it's not unheard of for some, prosecutors to actually be best friends with the judge,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, in all honesty, that reminds me of that article I told you about how the parents of that one kid, who committed that mass shooting, they're charging them for bullshit reasons other than, for political reasons. And like they were criticized, by the prosecutor, for giving each other, kissing looks, for like being affectionate in the courtroom. And you understand, that it's like, well, you gotta behave yourself when you're in court, which I agree with, but funny how like it's always the whole thing of how you gotta be behaved and professional in the courtroom. That only applies to the defendants and the defense attorney. The prosecutor or some of the witnesses, they can be as immature as they want, and the judge pretty much lets it go.
Yep. Fishron, we'd love to have you, and it's so easy to join. You just go to Patreon or Subscribe Star. $1 will get you in, and you don't even have to keep it. You can just pop in, it'll connect you up to the Discord, and you jump in on the voice chat. So we'll see you hopefully. And Darius Thurman says, I actually came to North Carolina last month for my mother's funeral. I'm sorry for your loss. I finally had pulled pork. Yes, barbecue the right way. The place where real barbecue comes from.
Yeah.
Not that crap people out west will try and sell.
Yeah.
Proper barbecue. Barbecue is not just anything on the grill. You're doing, burgers and hot dogs on the grill or whatever. You aren't barbecuing, you're grilling. They're two different things. True barbecue, it doesn't have to be smoked, but it's nice if it is. But true barbecue is slow cooked.
Yeah.
If you haven't taken at least 2 hours to cook it, you haven't made barbecue.
Yeah. I mean, the best barbecue, you hear stories about how it's like, one of the reasons why so many barbecue places open up so early is because they're actually not open for service like at 6 o'clock in the morning. They open early because that's how long they need to cook, because they open up at 12, so they need that 6 hours to get their pulled pork already.
We'll see you, SKM. Is there a link somewhere? Yeah, just pretty much at the bottom of any video. It's Shane DK on patreon.com or subscribestar.com. And what happens is when you donate, there's a place where you can connect it to your Discord. And you can see on the screen right now, you just go to discord.bogosity.tv. I have it automatically going to that invite link there. That just kind of redirects to it. It's a public link. Anyone can jump in that way. But if you connect your Patreon or Subscribestar to the Discord, it'll give you special access to the Livestream VC.
Yeah. By the way, Shane, that thing we mentioned about prosecutors and all that, I did have an interesting idea. Now, granted, it probably wouldn't work in the grand scheme of things because they'd find a way to abuse it or rewrite it. But, one thing is that if we absolutely must have government officials like prosecutors, one idea I had is here's the deal. If you take a job under for any political or public office, and that includes things like prosecutors and judges, once your term is over, that's it. You can't go back into politics. You're done.
Yeah.
You got to get a real job like the rest of us.
Well, Pip's bringing it on. I had barbecue in Texas. What's the difference? Don't get me started on this. So just the quick rundown. In Texas, they just grill the bejesus out of it, cook the life out of it. They say, you gotta sear it to hold in the juices. That's BS. There is no truth to that whatsoever. And they just cook the life out of things, so they have to make the barbecue sauce really thick and strong to where you really can't taste much of the meat underneath it. Whereas proper barbecue, like we have here in North Carolina, the sauce is a very thin tomato and vinegar based barbecue sauce with some spices added in and a little brown sugar. Mostly it's just there to keep the pulled pork moist, but I mean you can add additional stuff to it if you want, but it's really the flavor of the barbecue. Like, people also say this about spare ribs, because oh no, it's got to be baby back ribs because spare ribs are so tough. Not if you slow cook them. Get the spare ribs, put them in the oven at like 250, 300 for a couple hours, and they will be fall off the bone tender. You don't even really need sauce. I mean, if you like sauce, put on it, but you don't need it. Oh my God, it's so, so tender and juicy and savory. Slow cook it, man.
Yeah. Oh crap, what was I gonna say?
Well, I mean, yeah, pretty much most barbecue in the South is pork, but I mean, you can barbecue beef too, but it doesn't really.
Oh, now I know what it was.
Now
I know what it was gonna say. I actually read an interesting thing, because so many people are complaining on Thanksgiving. It's like, I love turkey. I love the taste of turkey, but God damn it, no matter how hard I try, the turkey always ends up coming out dry. I tried everything. I tried lowering the temperature and slow cooking it. I tried cooking it. That nothing's working. And I found out, well, there's actually a reason why your turkey's always coming out dry. It's not because you're not applying enough moisture. It's because you're cooking it wrong in the wrong position. See, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people say, okay, you cook it on the back with the breast facing upward. A lot of people say what you're actually supposed to do is cook it breast facing down and the back
Upside
up.
down. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
because
That's the way you do it.
all the juices will pool and go to the breast rather than on the back. And people say, well, then how can we do it? Then how can we do it? Back, breast facing upward. It's like simple presentation, because a turkey cooked upside down doesn't come out looking as nice. But at the end of the day, it's about flavor.
Yeah, Pip, that's the way you do ribs. Like there, you had ribs done right. And going back to beef, I guess really the kind of roast beef or the shredded beef or stuff like that would be the closest equivalent to the pork barbecue we have here, where it's just slow cooked. It just falls apart in your hand, and it's so juicy and tender. It's so good.
It melts in your mouth.
You almost don't have to chew it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But yeah, going back to turkey, that kind of makes me another thing about food that I kind of hate is like those people who are snobbish that are like, no, you gotta do this to the food to make it look good. And it's like, does it affect the flavor? Not really. Then what's the point?
All right, JC has an interesting question. If the rapid temperature change in the climate is due to humans burning fossil fuel, or we can just open it up to pollution in general, how is climate change not aggression? And I think the main point is that, if you're blowing pollution onto someone else's property, then it's aggression. But like if it's the smoke from your chimney, but it's cold and everyone has fires and they're blowing smoke everywhere, they can't really complain about you doing it, right?
Oh yeah.
So I mean, if we're all, if we're all driving cars and we're all using electricity from coal plants or whatever, because we don't really have a choice, do we? We have to go with whatever our monopoly power provider does. And I mentioned this before, but I actually kind of live in a nice place because most of the power we get comes from a nuclear power plant less than 2 miles from here. Right next to that is a hydroelectric, and that's most of that. And I think it's like half a mile down the road from me is a solar farm that's doing a lot of. So I got nice green carbon-free power here. So.
But Shane, aren't you?
All depends on where you are.
Aren't your kids being born with 3 eyes and 2 extra arms? Yeah, that's not
to let you know what an evil person I am. At night, you can see like this kind of orange yellow glow coming from over the woods, and people ask me, "Oh, what's that? What's that glow over there?" I said, "That's the nuclear power plant." And I wait a few seconds for this look of horror to come over the face before I tell them that it's the lights in the parking lot doing that.
Yeah.
I'm terrible, I know.
Yeah. I've seen like actual nuclear technicians like watch those, videos of, those old nuclear things. And like one doctor's like, listen, I've actually treated radiation sickness before. And yes, radiation does a lot of messed up stuff to your body, but it does not turn you into a giant monster human. It doesn't do that. It can't do that.
It gives you cancer. It makes your skin pockmarked. It does really bad things to you for someone to die of radiation poisoning. But I think apart from Chernobyl, there hasn't been anything related to nuclear power in terms of just someone dying from that. And the only reason it happened in Chernobyl is that when the firefighters came in, they didn't have the proper radiation gear. And I don't know if they just didn't know that or if they were just that much, badass heroes that we're going to get in there and we're going to save as many people as we can. And they faced the radiation to do that.
And as you pointed out in several videos, the only reason Chernobyl was so bad was because the Soviets weren't taking the necessary precautions. They were taking shortcuts, and they didn't have safety things.
They didn't even put a containment building around it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, after it happens, they helicopter over and dump concrete over it. It's like, well, okay, now you're doing that.
Yeah.
See you, fish on.
And if I recall correctly too, a lot of them, there were actual scientists in the lab telling their superiors, I don't think we should be doing these safety tests because the reactors are not looking so well, and they were like, no, do it anyway. We got a deadline. Do it anyway.
Oh, and Fishron became a donor, so yeah. Hopefully we'll see you in here next month. That'd be cool. Energy recovery and waste to energy stuff. There really isn't any such thing as nuclear waste if you think about it, because as long as the radiation is above a background level, you should be able to convert it to energy now.
It is funny.
Can you do that? Well, we can do that with all the actinides, and it's the actinide, especially the transuranics that you're worried about with nuclear waste, like plutonium and neptunium and americium and all that. That's the stuff that lasts for 100,000 years or whatever before it gets down to a safe background level. But that stuff you can burn. That stuff you can use as fuel.
Yeah,
you can use that.
Powers.
It's when it gets down basically below radium that it's hard to get it from, just because there's so little of it there. But there are designs for potential Generation 5 reactors that would actually be able to get the energy from that. And then there will be no such thing as nuclear waste ever. Because you just use it until it goes to background levels.
Sadly, JC, you won't get superpowers. It's like that Family Guy episode where Mayor West is like, "Don't worry, I will fight those super villains myself." And then he rolls around in some nuclear waste to gain superpowers, and then it cuts away. He's in the hospital. It's like, "Mr. West, I'm afraid you have lymphoma." Oh, probably from rolling around in that nuclear waste. What the hell were you trying to prove? I was trying to get superpowers. Well, that's just stupid. Why would you do that?
Turning trash into power? I'm not sure how you would do that.
Yeah, it's called biomass.
I mean, I get, well, in a way we're doing that already, because in landfills, naturally there are bacteria that produce methane. And they have, when they put the trash in there, after they put it in, they have a covering that goes over it. And that covering catches the methane, and they convert that into powers. And a single landfill can power thousands of homes with that methane. So in a way, we're already doing that. But I don't know if there would ever be like anything like a trash reactor. It's kind of like the people who claim to, we've got a car that uses water as fuel. It's like, how is that supposed to work? Because anyone who knows anything about chemicals knows that water is inert. Well, it separates it into hydrogen and oxygen. Yeah, but you need electricity to do that. So how are you generating that electricity?
It's like those people that think that algae can be used as a power source.
Yeah. Theoretically, it could. It just doesn't produce much.
Oh, yeah.
And I actually like that there's a lot of solar engineers that are finally like, the whole photovoltaic cells, the solar panel things, it's not working out because they just can't make them efficient enough. They keep generating all this heat. And they're thinking, hey, why don't we use the heat? And so they're actually borrowing a concept from the Generation 3 nuclear powers by having a molten salt loop, only instead of heating up the molten salt with some nuclear material or something like that, they have like this area where there's just like hundreds of mirrors all around there concentrating the sunlight on a single point, and that heats up the molten salt and it goes through the loop. I mean, it's still not going to be, as good as nuclear, which can do full load following because it's just completely constant in its output. But at least we're pretty much dealing with a lot of problems of solar, which is like, what do you do how do you store the power when the sun goes down, or if it's a cloudy day or whatever? If you're heating up the molten salt and you just pull off the heat as you need it and turn it into power, then that's a better way to do it. And that's how they do load following and price following, with modern nuclear reactors, like Natrium. The idea is all this just drops into place where you have an existing coal plant and use the turbines from all that. And it's the molten salt loop that drives that boils the water to do that. And then the nuclear is just heating that up. And they can do that with solar too. And they can do both together and just have them working together for that. So Yeah, I mean the
Yeah.
and also with photovoltaic cells, you have to do. I mean, there's a lot of strip mining and all sorts of terrible stuff that goes into getting the materials for that you really just can't get any other way. And
Hey, Shane, what was with all that techno mumbo jumbo? Fourth root's not here.
I'm sorry, I just think it's cool that there are people actually thinking about these things. It's like, how do we actually deal with all these problems of solar power? We'll just scrap what we have and come up with a completely new approach that actually looks like
Yeah.
it's a lot better.
Yeah, actually, funny thing about John Smith about dumping things into the ocean, because people treat, dumping into the ocean like it's the worst thing ever. And while yes, you don't want to dump everything in the ocean, and there are definitely things like plastic that shouldn't be in the ocean. Ironically, in some parts of the oceans, life has actually increased because we dump stuff in there. Like a good example is the Bikini Atoll. Despite the fact that there were like 10 nuclear tests done there now, it's flourishing with life. And some scientists think that the reason is because there's so many ships at the bottom of the ocean that many of the wildlife are using them as homes for their coral and all that.
Fishron needs to connect Discord to PayPal. If you don't figure it out tonight, just put a post in the regular Discord, and when I get up tomorrow and see that, I'll dig up that link from. I mean, it's not PayPal. It's Patreon or Subscribestar that you need to do that from.
Yeah.
So, if you did PayPal by mistake, let me know and I'll see if I can refund that to you. And you can do it over Patreon or Subscribestar.
Like, and all this talk about environmentalism, like, there is one book that if I had a time machine, I really want to go back in time and tell Dr. Seuss not to write it, and that's the Lorax.
Yeah.
Because it's like Dr. Seuss. The forest didn't fail because the Onceler was making money. It was because he was an idiot and wasn't planning. Like, a lot of people have pointed that out. The Onceler didn't need a green conscience. What he needed was a business manager to say, hey, Mr. Onceler, we can't just tear down everything all at once. We gotta plant and keep a healthy population of these trees. That way we can grow more trees and have reserves so we can keep making those products. But no, everyone just takes it at face value and all that, and people praise it and all that. I mean, yeah, I'm sorry. The Lorax is one of those books where I can't read because it's just...
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me of Noam Chomsky in a way. Like, so many people say, Noam Chomsky is a master of linguistics and all that. I'm sorry, I don't take him seriously as a linguistics anymore because he's a socialist. And people, if you do not see economics and trading and pricing as a form of communication, you're out to lunch then.
Yep.
Yeah.
I see it. It only came through as 48 cents. Let's see, can I refund this?
I have good memories from the Lorax. Yeah, you probably remember those catchy bubbling songs, from the TV version of it. But the story itself is stupid.
I never saw the TV version. I read the book, and even as a kid, I thought it was dumb. A 52-cent fee on a $1 transfer. Oh, fucking PayPal.
Yeah.
Oh my god. And I don't even know if I can refund this.
I mean, call me crazy, Shane, and I doubt it would ever happen, but I actually have an interesting idea that I think they should... I think that what there should be? There should be like a kids show or something out there that actually teaches them, individual rights and all. Like, it doesn't get too political and all that, but it teaches people, it teaches children about the concept of individualism and how you're your own sapient person and all that.
Tell you what, Fishron, send me I'll take care of this tomorrow because we got to wrap this up. But send me a DM on Discord tomorrow and let me know what your PayPal is, and I'll send you the $1 back. And I don't know why they took 52 cents out.
Yeah, Pitsqueak.
Oh my
I'm
god.
the Lorax. I speak for the trees. Well, what about all the people that benefit from my business? The customers who like my product, the workers who are getting rich from my industry. Where's the voice for them? Well, carry on.
Yeah. I don't know. Bitcoin transaction fees, they can be several dollars at their peak. So
Yeah.
All right. It's no problem, Fishron. Just send me the email you use for PayPal in Discord DM, and I'll refund it to you tomorrow, and you can do it. And you might want to wait until the start of next month, because I'm not really sure how PayPal does. I mean, not PayPal. How Patreon does the month thing. So wait until the start of the month just to make sure that donation will get you through whenever we do the next live stream. We'll get you set up. We'll get you taken care of. I'm so sorry that happened. Need to wrap this up. Anything you want to say, Chris, before we sign off?
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me. And thanks to, who was it? It wasn't Tia. Who was it that joined us for a while?
Tangelo or something?
Tangelo, yeah, it was Tangelo.
Yeah, the guy who named himself after the fruit that scares clowns.
Yep. So thanks for that. Thanks for everyone who participated in the chats, especially thanks to Darius Furman for all those super chats. They helped more than you can ever imagine. And thank you so much for watching. We'll be back next month for a live stream. Of course, have all the other great videos on this channel, and we'll see you then. And until next time, stay strong and be free.